Greetings, it's your host, Gabe Morales. Today I'm going to cover crime and gangs in a region that is not well known to most Americans. As a geographic location in the United States, the Dixie area is usually defined as the 11 southern states that succeeded from the Union in late 1860 and early 1861 to form the Confederate States of America. These states were South Carolina, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Texas, Virginia, Arkansas, North Carolina, and Tennessee. I have taught all over the Southeast United States, including the Tennessee Gang Investigators Association. I've taught in Alabama, North Carolina, Florida, and I've networked with officers all over the Deep South. This is me on one of my trainings for the Tennessee Gang Investigators at an old plantation. I remember seeing the mansion of the slave master and then feeling very eerie as I entered the slave quarters. And there was pictures on the wall of slaves that lived and slept in that building. I'll never forget it. The mansion actually still had holes in it from shots fired during the Civil War. Dixieland is often referred to as hot jazz or traditional jazz, and is a style of music that was developed in New Orleans at the start of the 20th century. In this case, we refer to the land of Dixie or Dixieland by focusing on gang activity in the Deep South. I wrote a book about the criminal organizations active in this area, which I'll show at the end of this episode, just in case you're interested in learning more. Crime groups in the southeast portion of the United States run from fairly unorganized groups, like moonshine operations, to full-fledged street gangs, prison gangs, motorcycle gangs, and organized crime. There are even drug cartels with links to Mexico operating in this area. Central America, South America, and Caribbean crime groups are also active. While they may not fit the definition of a street gang, criminal groups in the southern part of the United States have existed much longer than most people realize. Many of the early Southeast United States gangs consider themselves to be rebels and anti-establishment freedom fighters, probably much like the January 6th federal Capitol insurrectionists viewed themselves. These were groups and individuals like the James Younger Gang, which was a notable 19th century gang of American outlaws that included the notorious Jesse James. They had their origins as Confederate bushwhackers, active in the state of Missouri during the American Civil War. In the late 1800s, Myra Bella Starr Reed was a notorious female outlaw in America's Old West. As a resident of the Indian Territory, which was the current state of Oklahoma, she came under the jurisdiction of Judge Isaac C. Parker in Fort Smith, Arkansas. Starr's associates included Cole Younger, Frank, and Jesse James. Her reputation as an outlaw became epic myth, and she was called the Bandit Queen. In my book, I discussed the history of African Americans, from slavery to emancipation, how many of them fled north to find jobs in cities like Chicago and New York, and how some stayed behind and were involved in criminal activities in order to survive. In order to understand this, you have to go back to pre-Civil War days and to understand why many blacks today feel there are two Americas, one black and one white. A growing number of gang members in the Southeast United States today are Chicano Latinos, and many people are surprised to find out that there's a large growth of Hispanic gangs. For instance, in Arkansas, the chicken industry is huge. Many of the individuals working there are Mexican immigrants, both legal and illegal, and many of their children are left at home to be watched by the oldest sibling. Many times, these kids join gangs. So yes, there are Mexican gangs in Arkansas. The Civil War left almost 1 million Americans dead, both Union and Confederate forces, and it destroyed much of the South's infrastructure. When the Confederacy collapsed, slavery was abolished, but hate for the Northern Yankees remained amongst whites. Afterwards, during the Reconstruction period of 1865 to 1877, many businesses and towns were rebuilt. But there are many people, even today, who say slavery did not end, it just changed chains. The Ku Klux Klan probably came from the Greek word ku klux, which means circle, and Klan was an alternative version of clan, C-L-A-N. So Ku Klux Klan suggested a circle or band of brothers. By the time the original 6 members met in December 1865, the opening phase of the Reconstruction, was nearly complete. All 11 former rebel states were being rebuilt on astonishingly lenient terms, which allowed many ex-Confederate leaders to return to positions of power. While there were some blacks originally put in political positions, after a few years, they had practically disappeared. Southern state legislatures began enacting laws which made it clear that the aristocrats who ran them before intended to yield none of their pre-war powers and dominance. These laws became known as the Black Codes, or Jim Crow laws, which amounted to virtual re-enslavement of blacks. A legendary Confederate general and former slave trader named Nathan Bedford Forrest was from Tennessee. He joined the Klan fairly soon after it began, and when the KKK looked for a worthy leader, they chose him to become the Klan's first Grand Wizard. From 1867 to 1868, there is little doubt that Forrest was its chief missionary, traveling all over the South, establishing new chapters and quietly advising new members on how to operate. Throughout the summer of 1867, the Invisible Empire, as the Klan was also called, changed. It ceased clownish antics that brought laughter during its parades and public appearances, and instead they took on a full nature of a secret and powerful force with a sinister purpose, and membership grew rapidly. By 1868, General Forrest visited Atlanta several times and met with prominent Georgia conservatives as well as powerful politicians in other states. But it is widely believed that Forrest ordered the Klan to disband in January 1869, even though surviving documents are rather ambiguous. Some historians think that Forrest's order was just a trick so he could deny any future responsibility and publicly disavow direct knowledge of the Klan's atrocities. Others say it was just a smart business move so that he could get political approval for his private railroad ventures during the American Industrial Revolution. Whatever is the case, most people believe that the Ku Klux Klan ceased to exist by the end of 1871, and Forrest even testified before a congressional investigation on its activities on June 27, 1871. The Klan would not be heard of again until a movie came out called The Birth of a Nation in 1915. The Black Codes also created a criminal class as it outlawed virtually everything, and many blacks became incarcerated in jails and prisons. In fact, many people believe this was the first prison industrial complex. Convict numbers in Mississippi quadrupled and tripled in Georgia. It was during this time that convict leasing was very popular. Basically, landowners would rent or lease cheap labor by prisoners who were taken out every day to plantations and to do road work and other jobs. In 1878, Georgia leased out 1,239 prisoners, and all but 115 of them were African Americans. They were often referred to as chain gangs, as they were tied up by chains to prevent them from escaping during the daytime until they were taken back to their prison cells. As the economic growth increased in the northern cities and in places like St. Louis and New Orleans, many blacks fled to those cities. Crime rose in all these regions during the late 1880s and early 90s, and whites typically held blacks responsible for the increases in crime. Southern newspapers publicized black crime and exaggerated its impact. Black males were often depicted as being drunks, being high on drugs, and sex crazed, ready to rape white women. And many black males were lynched before their cases could be heard and justice served in court. Many people believe these stereotypes still exist. It is true that in some communities, black gangs formed, or black underground criminal groups that controlled gambling, prostitution, and other vices. But the same thing was occurring in white communities, but they did not get the negative attention that the blacks did. The Birth of a Nation, originally called The Klansman, is a 1915 American silent epic drama film directed and co-produced by D.W. Griffith, starring Lillian Gish. The film's release is credited as being one of the main events that inspired the formation of the second era of the Ku Klux Klan. This second revival of the KKK began just after World War I, which started in 1914. When American fighting men started coming home after the war in 1918, many of them did not like blacks taking jobs they thought should go to white men. And so the Klan was often used as an intimidation factor for Black men who were employed with companies. The second wave of the Klan adopted many of the features of the first Klan, including cross burnings and mass KKK parades to intimidate local Blacks. And it is a fact that many law enforcement in southern states were members, if not KKK sympathizers. Some people believe that at its height, the KKK in 1925 had over 4 million members. On August 8, 1925, an estimated 40,000 of them marched down Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C., right in front of the White House, just to show how powerful they really were. In addition to the KKK, my book covers individuals such as Charles Pretty Boy Floyd and the Ma Barker Gang, named after Kate Ma Barker, who operated during the Great Depression. Also, Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow, known as Bonnie and Clyde, who were part of the Barrow Gang between 1932 and 1934. I talk about Frank Jelly Nash, who is often referred to as the most successful bank robber in U.S. history. Many people are also surprised that famous gangster Charles Lucky Luciano, who was born in Sicily but made his bones in New York, also had ties to Hot Springs, Arkansas. Luciano, the biggest pimp in New York City, could often be seen strolling along Bathhouse Row in Hot Springs, walking alongside the city's chief of detectives. New York detectives came down and approached Luciano and invited him to return with them peacefully to the Big Apple so he could be arrested. Luciano naturally declined and said he was having a good time gambling and cavorting in the Spa City, which at the time was very politically corrupt and a known safe haven for criminals. Luciano was detained anyway and moved to confinement in Little Rock the next day. Hot Springs was also an ideal hideout for Chicago's Al Scarface Capone. Owen Oni Madden was often referred to as being the English Godfather or the Killer, and he came to Hot Springs in 1835, which was a big contrast to the violence and fast life in New York City that he was accustomed to. Madden had grown up in Manhattan's Hell's Kitchen and was best known for giving more organization to organized crime, as depicted in the movie The Cotton Club. He also often advised Luciano and other New York criminals. Madden lived in Hot Springs until his death in 1965. One of his frequent contacts was a local Madam, Maxine Temple Jones. She provided her high-class clientele with years of illegal adult entertainment before going straight and publishing a tell-all autobiography, Call Me Madam, in 1983. And then there was the Cosa Nostra, which actually started in New Orleans, also known as the Big Easy, during the late 19th century. I talk about this in my book, including New Orleans mobster Carlos Marcello, who grew up in the French Quarter of New Orleans. Marcello was a close associate of Frank Costello, leader of the Genovese crime family, and he also joined forces with Meyer Lansky. And some people even believe that he was involved in the JFK assassination and threats towards Bobby Kennedy, who was his attorney general. You can read more about this in my book. I also talk about the Dixie Mafia, which was a criminal organization based in Biloxi, Mississippi. And I talk about the State Line Mob and its leader, Carl Douglas Towhead White. In addition, I talk about the third wave of the KKK during the Civil Rights era. I talk about California-style gangs in the Southeast United States. Alabama. Today we have Officer Adam. He works in the greater Birmingham, Alabama area, and he's going to talk to us a little bit about what he's seeing as far as gang activity in his area. Of course, we've seen in Memphis where, street crime teams that can be misused, the use of force and targeting individuals. So it's sad to say, but, those cases, I think, are, they get the media attention, but the good cops, they don't get the media attention. So, unfortunately, 90+%, they're doing the right thing, like yourself and other officers like Officer Austin. They just don't get that credit they deserve. And I thank you for the work you've done over the years and sharing intelligence with me. I've learned a lot. I've been there personally in Alabama, met you, know you're a good person and you care. And that's one thing I think in training we can't do is teach officers how to care. Doesn't matter where you have Black officers and, majority Black communities or Latino officers and majority Latino communities. One thing you can't teach them is how to care and how to be professional. So thank you. I want to get that out of the way first. Thank you for the job you do.
Like I've told you before, even before I became a cop, just in case anyone watching and is disconnected from anyone they know in Alabama, we've had the exact same gangs everyone else has. If you can name it, typically we've either had it or it was passing through. We have numerous sightings of gangs. I mean, we got small pockets of white fence that have passed through North Alabama, things like that. So you have your transient gangs, you have officers reporting things that are more than likely more transient in nature, or larger gangs from California that may have settled into an area because the children moved with the parents. You got that phenomenon where they settle. Sometimes they take off, other times they don't take off. I cannot speak for all of Alabama. I cannot speak for rural Alabama. We have pockets of Crips, Blood, folk in rural counties in Alabama where you would be surprised, but you get to talking to local officers and they'll tell you, yeah, we've got a whole neighborhood filled with those guys, or a whole family lives down here. So, but we work with what we got. And a lot of times that's just individual officers networked through, for example, the Alabama gang investigators. And we talk to each other. We learn from each other. And at a minimum, we try to maintain that connectivity. You came up in Alabama, you knew Crips, you knew Bloods, you knew folk people, stuff like that. No one knew anything about Latino gangs until Marco and you guys came in, and Tony Avendorf coming in, and all the guys you introduced us to. So big thank you goes out to you guys for advancing our knowledge. Because here's my thing. I'm one of the instructors at one of our police academies on gangs. And I tell every class, I'm not an expert, but if you got a question, I will pick up the phone and call an expert, which would be like you or one people. But we try to just make sure the guys are working intelligently, at least from an officer safety standpoint. I mean, if you can't recognize that tattoo, and you might want to call a backup unit, at a minimum, I want people to recognize what's around them so they understand threat levels as they're out there. In Central Alabama, when we met years ago, I was just touching the Sereno gangs. But, through that time period, we saw, because you're dealing with a large influx of Hispanic and Latinos to Alabama that had never happened. It's like 15 years ago. It never happened in our state. And now it's, we are a black, brown, red, yellow, white state. You know what I'm saying? We're like everybody else. But back in the day, you were white or you were black, or you might be Asian. It was just that. It's just the South, and the South is a different animal than it was 15 years ago. And it's richer for it. But with that came the gangs. So that's a type of gang mentality, the culture. It was just something really unknown until you guys told us what to keep an eye out for. You guys, Marco Silva comes over, he teaches us what to look for. Well, once you know what to look for, go be a good neighborhood cop. Go talk to people. After that, I think actually everything comes easily as far as knowledge. But yeah, we've always had a history of folk and people gangs. It was really just the Sereno gangs we dealt with. And at the point that I was working with the ICE National Gang Task Force years ago, I think we had, on some of our roundups, I think at the most I was maybe dealing with like 7 clickers all at once. Our largest one at the time was like Brown Pride and Malditos out of ATL, which I believe originated on the West Coast originally. It's just history I've heard. So we're dealing with, La Gran Familia guys from ATL. Then the La Camada gang come in. The feds hit their upper echelon with some gun cases and other things back in the day. Then they learned, okay, the cops are wise. They're not stupid. They actually know what they're looking at. And they went underground. Man, absolutely. It's the independent crews, like I said, whatever you want to call them. Money gang. We call them money gangs. I think that's piggybacking off what most people nationally call them. But, and even then, some of the money gangs, like the GTOs back in the day, officers were reporting seeing, pitchforks and 5-point stars on the same wall, showing love. So it's like, we're like, oh, those are hybrid gangs. And they're like, no, that's a money gang.
Well, thank you for sharing that, man. I could really relate in a lot of ways. Officer Austin, can you please tell us what kind of gang activity are you seeing in your area in the state of Alabama?
A lot of it these days, especially here recently, has been a lot of the money gangs and the neighborhood type gangs. We do have a heavy Hispanic influence of Serenos in the area. That's our main. That's the main thing we run into when we're coming out with, anything other than money or neighborhood gangs.
I read today about a young black man who's considered a drug kingpin. He was dealing with the Mexican drug cartels directly, the Gulf cartel. I don't know if you're familiar with that case or not, but that was pretty interesting to me to see what was happening there. And I'm sure he is not the only individual in that situation. You see him personally, Mexican drug cartel connections, California, Chicago. Where's this stuff coming from?
Yeah, especially our meth. A lot of our meth, people think Alabama, South, we're going to be, in our backyard cooking it up and used to. That's really what it was. But now is we're seeing a lot of it come straight from Mexico, and that's one of the main supplies right now. We have a lot of fentanyl, a lot of methamphetamine, and we're where I'm at. We're located near I-65, which is that main interstate, and so it's spreading like wildfire where we're at.
You mentioned fentanyl. Are you seeing a lot of overdoses also with that drug?
Yes, I know we deal with it almost, every day. We're getting medical calls, medical assist calls, and a lot of it is with overdosing, and fentanyl is involved. Whether it was accidental, something they bought, they didn't realize it was there, or here recently we're running into a lot of people that's what they want. They want the fentanyl. They don't want the heroin or anything like that. They're wanting straight fentanyl.
Now, are you guys trained in Narcan? Do you carry Narcan or?
Yes, we are. And I know every surrounding agency around me, they do the same.
Of course, drugs we know are in the gang lifestyle, part of it, big money maker for a lot of gangs and individuals that are non-gang that are out there trying to make some easy money. So what kind of crimes are you seeing surrounding this drug usage? Because these individuals, a lot of them, they're not working 9-to-5 jobs, are they, or are they?
Oh, well, I know in our area, yes. You're going to see a lot of your dealers, a lot of your users, they have pretty common jobs. I made a bus not too long ago, and the gentleman, when he was a manager at a software company, and he was pushing cocaine. But yeah, that's and it's more than just with the gang activity around here. With what we're dealing with, it's more than just drugs. We're having a lot of property crimes, a lot of unlawful break-ins in vehicles, a lot of prostitution. Prostitution is huge now. They're trying to right now. I know lawmakers are trying to put everything about prostitution under human trafficking to help out, to be more strict about it, because that's getting more extreme than the drug deals and the drug business that we have around here. What you see with a lot of money gangs is they're a lot younger people. You don't have your OGs. You don't have, anybody that's real reputable in any kind of gang, part of a money gang. If they are, they're in the back shadows actually running it. But most of these money gangs, which are right now the most dangerous that we deal with, it's these young kids that know, hey, I'm going to run. If I get caught, it's not that bad. But if I can hurt one of them, get away, it's even better.
I talk about La Mara Salvatrucha activity in the Southeast. I talk about the Latin Kings activity in Florida and Maniac Latin Disciples. A lot of people don't know, but Jose Padilla, also known as the Dirty Bomber, was radicalized in a Florida corrections facility. I also talk about Haitian gangs in Florida. I talk about gang activity in Memphis, Tennessee, the Chicago-style black gangs, folks, and people. Hurricane Katrina impacted New Orleans gangs. In New Orleans, the gangs often went by wards, as they did in Chicago. New Orleans gangs also would use 504. I remember after Hurricane Katrina, even in Seattle, we had a big influx of New Orleans gangsters, and they often dressed like Master P. Cami gear, gold grills, and everything. As opposed to California gangsters who drove lowriders, the Deep South gangsters would often ride high riders, 1980s General Motors sedans or Ford Crown Vics, often former police cars that they thought went really, really fast. Actually, they didn't, and they'd jack them up and put big rims on them. And of course, Aryan gangs continue to be a big player in the Southeast United States. There are the Aryan Nation Knights and the Loyal White Knights in Louisiana, which are factions of the KKK. There are also the Southern Mountain Knights, the Original Knight Riders, and Loyal White Knights in Tennessee. And these groups are active in all of the Southeast states. The state of Alabama had the Confederate Hammerskins, who are also active in South Carolina. There are prison gangs. For instance, in Alabama, there's the Aryan Brotherhood of Alabama and the Southern Brotherhood of Alabama. The Aryan Circle is very active in Arkansas, as well as the White Aryan Resistance. In Florida, there are gangs like Unforgiven. They're actually the biggest Aryan gang in the system.
I really got deeply involved in the Unforgiven gang about 2.5 years ago. I'm on the board of the Florida Gang Investigators Association, and Unforgiven has been popping up here and there, but mostly in the correctional system. And then as a result, with an operation through Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and the Pasco County Sheriff's Office, just to name one of the multiple agencies involved, they finished off with what's called Operation Blackjack in 2018. And it really peeled the onion back on how expansive this prison gang had become, not only in the state of Florida, but we do have active members in at least 3 other states. So with that, and I also do, as you know, the motorcycle gang portion for most of the training conducted here in Florida. And this particular gang has taken to a trend that we're seeing in other parts of the country, where the criminal gang is breaking out and forming an outlaw motorcycle club, so they can expand their territory, expand their presence, and also get involved with the big 8 now outlaw motorcycle clubs, which are all of them are transnational. The gang goes back to in the late 80s, initially started out as the Brand or 1488, which is an Alaska gang that has just been in the news, but settled on Unforgiven right around, I've got some of my dates here, right around 1992. They were initially tied in with the Outlaws Motorcycle Club since their inception. So that's where the underpinnings come from, the motorcycle gang as well as the white supremacy angle. Take us to today. We've had Operation Blackjack 2 that culminated with multiple indictments in 2021. A vast majority of those individuals were part of the street faction, because the gang is significantly expanded from the correctional facilities to operating in just about every part of the state of Florida. In fact, they actually have the state broken down into regions with regional meetings and state meetings. As a result of the overwhelming evidence gathered by that great team of guys and gals that worked the case, a majority and a significant majority have pleaded out.
So was that a state case, or was that a federal RICO case? What was that?
No, that was a federal case on the OSADF, I believe,
Okay.
that ATF spearheaded.
Okay, so they're going to be going to Bureau of Prisons, no parole, and doing most
They
of
are, in fact, already in the system.
There are prison gangs in Georgia, such as the Ghostface Gangsters. There is the Aryan Brotherhood of Mississippi, which was started in 1984. There is the Aryan Brotherhood of North Carolina, as well as Bound for Glory, which was started in 2011. The Dirty White Boys is a prison gang that started in the BOP as a softball team, and they are active in several states, including Tennessee. There is the Aryan Brotherhood and Brotherhood Forever of Tennessee, the Aryan Nations of Tennessee, and of course, there are Latino gangs, as well as black gangs like United Blood Nation all over the Southeast United States, as well as factions of the Gangster Disciples, Vice Lords, and other predominantly black gangs.
So what are the major groups that are active there in North Carolina, out on the, if you don't mind telling us, out on the street and on the inside? I know the inside and the outside affect each other. So what are the major groups you guys are dealing with there?
The Bloods by far. The Bloods have primarily taken over the East Coast. What we started seeing originally in North Carolina were Crips down in that Fayetteville area where Fort Bragg is. And that was one of the first situations or the first major national gang stories that I had an opportunity to interview a lot of the participants in that. But it was the Rolling 30s, did a murder down at Fort Bragg. So the Crips kind of propelled themselves originally on the streets. Now in the prison system, we were tracking from the origins, we were tracking 5%ers, Durham boys, Fayetteville boys, and there was a group called the Renegade. Those were the 4 original gangs in the North Carolina prison system. Well, it didn't take long for folk nations to introduce themselves, Bloods to introduce themselves. And the Bloods actually came to North Carolina probably mid-90s. And that the gentleman who brought it down came from New York and brought the 9-tray set. So I dealt with him. But as of today,
so we're talking United Blood Nation affiliated.
Exactly, United Blood Nation.
East Coast more than West Coast.
Exactly. He brought that entire nation down into the prison system, into the communities, and they are still prevalent. So Bloods are the primary gang in the state. Sureños pretty much hold the drug market down. They're significant. The numbers are growing. You see a skirmish of Norteños, but Sureños are certainly as prominent and as dominant because of the drug market. The numbers aren't there. I would probably say certainly Bloods, Crip folk, because of that East Coast connection, they will tie bonds together, unlike in the Midwest where, folk and Crip don't really intermingle the way that they do here in this state here. But the most dominant ones is certainly the Sureños and the Bloods. And in the prison system, it's Bloods. You're probably talking about, for every 3, 2 of them may be Bloods. So they are pretty significant. The Hispanic gangs are significant, but they're not as significant as they are on the streets.
And let's not forget the outlaw motorcycle gangs, who continue to assist even on my channels that they're just clubs. Yet many of their members continually are involved in criminal activity, and new gangs continue to emerge in the Southeast United States. Law enforcement is trying to keep track of these via gang investigator associations and multi-agency gang task forces. So as you can see, there are a wide variety of gangs in the southern states and far more active than most people are aware of. Hopefully this video has explained past racial tensions in the region and modern gang dynamics in society. If you're interested in learning more, please consider purchasing my book, Dixieland Gangs, via Amazon.com. This is Gabe Morales signing off. Gangsters, cops, and politicians.